So what is the difference between a classical and a zero gravity airliner, for example?
Well, there actually is not very much difference at all. We use almost exactly the same systems. The only thing that changes is we fly with 3 pilots simultaneously to perform the maneuver. One pilot does the thrust axis, controls the acceleration. One pilot does the roll axis, and one pilot does the pitch axis. They have one small extra screen telling them the gravity level, so they know if they are doing it correctly or not. And really, that's the only change that is necessary. Almost any aircraft could do this kind of maneuver. It helps that our aircraft is quite old in terms of years, because that means the computers cannot take over. So they give some warnings, but the pilots are still in control. With newer planes, this wouldn't be possible. A lot of people ask, why don't we change the software? Why don't we make the computer fly the parabola itself? But this would be very, very difficult. This would mean you need a new certification. It would be a whole new plane from the aviation authority point of view. So we don't do that. We just use basically the normal plane, the normal software, but we fly it in a special way. Inside, there are some minor differences because we are doing this for science. So we have space to do experiments. So we have to take out all of the seats, or about half of the seats. And then we put padding on the floors, walls, and ceiling so that we have space for our experiments to be bolted to the floor and the scientists and engineers to work around them. And of course, we have to keep some seats for the normal takeoff and landing, just like any plane.
Maybe a sample or an example which spoke to a large audience, if it's possible.
Yeah. Well, I can give you a couple of different kind of examples, I guess. Ones that we use every day, they may not sound very interesting because we don't realize we are using them. But of course, we all use satellites every day in weather forecast, in communication, in GPS for our navigation. And a lot of these satellites are using technologies that were tested and developed in microgravity on planes like this one, especially in terms of heat transfer. Getting rid of heat of electronics is a very big problem in space. You don't have any air to put the heat into, and you don't have convection currents to take it away. So special technology has to be developed and tested in these environments. And this finds its way into our mobile phones, into our normal consumable devices. But it's really used very heavily in space, and we depend on space every day in lots of ways that we don't necessarily realize. So you are using this technology already every day. Perhaps a more human example, let's take the disease osteoarthritis, for example. As you may know, astronauts also suffer from this kind of thing in space because their bones waste away because they're not being used. So they tend to lose a lot of bone mass during spaceflight. And there's a lot of research to try and understand this and to counteract it. And this research is also being used to treat osteoarthritis on Earth, because some of the same mechanisms are being used. In fact, we don't really understand exactly how the disease works and how it progresses. But some of the mechanisms by which it might progress are dependent upon gravity. So only by testing in zero gravity can we find out if those mechanisms are the right ones or not, and then we can make targeted treatments for it. So that's a good example of how microgravity research is actually also being used for pharmacological research on Earth to treat a lot of people with a lot of very common diseases.
What are the safety and the reliability standards for this type of flight?
Okay. Well, basically, as you can imagine, the maneuver puts more stress on the aircraft than a normal flight. Of course it does. Now, the way that this would work in a normal flight, a normal aircraft, is that one takeoff and one flight and one landing is called one cycle. That's for any flight you've normally taken in your life. And the owners of the aircraft, they add up how many cycles, and after a certain number of how many 100 cycles, whatever it is, they have to check the engines. After another number of cycles, they have to check the wings. After another number of cycles, they have to check the airframe for fractures, this kind of thing. Now, on our aircraft, we actually do exactly the same, but we count the cycles differently. So we say one takeoff and landing is a cycle, and so is every single parabola. So when we do a flight with our normal flights are 31 parabolas and a takeoff and landing, that gets the same amount of maintenance as 32 normal flights, which is obviously a lot. The analysis shows that it's clearly very conservative. So we make sure that we are being safe. Usually when the guys take the plane back to the shop for the engineers to check, they open the engines and say, why are you here again? This still looks brand new. So of course we have to take those safety considerations into account, and we make sure we're conservative in terms of maintenance. The other safety considerations are what we are bringing on board, not the safety of the aircraft itself, but the safety of our activities, because our experiments often could have high temperatures. Maybe they are researching molten metals. They can have toxic chemicals, high pressures, moving parts, X-rays, all sorts of things that you wouldn't normally be allowed to take onto a flight. So before each campaign, we spend half a year working with all of the experimenters to make sure that their experiments will be safe. So we have 2 layers of containment around every pressure vessel. We have two fault redundancy cutoffs for any high temperature system or for any toxic gas release or something like this, so that the equipment is inherently safe. Even if it fails in a safe manner, because of course we want to keep everyone happy and healthy on board. And Nova Space, the company that we fly with, we've been doing this for about or more than 30 years now. With a perfect flight record. So they really know both how to make sure the aircraft is safe and how to make sure that the activities we do on board are safe as well.
Do you have any story or anecdote to speak about a flight parabolic? It marks you during an experience, maybe?
Oof, I think it's hard not to talk about my first parabola, because it's, of course, we do it for the science. We do it because we're using the environment to do some serious research. But you cannot deny it's a very human experience. People like to fly on this thing. It is a unique thing to do. I cannot describe to you how it feels. Some people say it's a little bit like scuba diving, because you have 6 degrees of freedom. You can go any direction you like. But in scuba diving, it's very slow, and you can still feel all of the organs in your body being pulled to the bottom of your body. Zero gravity doesn't feel like that. People say it feels a bit like going over the top of a roller coaster. And that's true, but that normally is very quick. It's a quarter of a second, and you get a big sense of movement. On the plane, it's 20 seconds, and you have no sense of movement. It's not something I can explain to you how it feels, but it is quite euphoric, especially the first time. My first time was 20 years ago now, and I still remember it very fondly. And I love to watch the faces of first-time flyers every time, to see their own reactions, and see after the first parabola, I look them in the eye, and then I can see that they now know how it feels, and they can't explain it to anyone else either.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Neil. It's very, very passionate and very exciting, maybe, to live this kind of experience.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, we're very excited to have Tintin and Snowy on board. We are looking forward. I think they will be very good flyers. I'm sure they will behave.
Oh, great. Thank you.